First, I'd like to talk with you about where we are, and this is one guy's version of where we are in our rural areas. And it's not just rural America, it's not just rural Canada, it's all rural areas in industrialized countries. We're all facing the same kind of questions right now, and I want to cover that. I'm going to use timber as the genesis, the start of the discussion, because I know it best, and not because we're important, but because we were first. Where are we in our rural areas? We're having what I call a collision of visions. For the last 50 years, both of our societies have had two things that humans had never had before: time and money. And what have they been doing with their 2-week summer vacation? They've been blowing out of places like Vancouver and Montreal and Los Angeles and Chicago and Denver and coming out to our rural areas and communing with us. And what do you know? They're falling in love. They fall in love with the very things we love about living here. They think that the places you live in were actually gone. They get 200 channels on their satellite TV, and they've been told it's disappeared. We've destroyed the earth, and here it is, right outside their window. Clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife, the very things we expect outside of our door are things that they don't get to see until they come visit with us. And just like us, they fall in love. They fall in love with what they call the last best places. And who could argue with that? I believe we live in the last best places. They even fall in love with our culture. They have a stereotypical view of who we are. But I can tell you, if they're blowing through eastern Montana at 85 miles an hour and they see a cowboy, they will slide to a stop on the freeway. Oh, honey, look, a cowboy. What's he do? I have no idea, but do you see the hat? They fall in love with what they think we are. And then they go into our little communities and they see hardworking, hard-playing, community-oriented, school-oriented, church-oriented people that still live in our rural resource communities, and they thought that was gone too. And there it is. It's alive. And they fall in love. And then they have to go home. And when they leave with a desire, and it's a desire we all understand. It's a desire to protect. They want to save what they perceive to be the last best parts of both of our countries. So when they go back to their home in Chicago, they start fighting to protect us. They fight through regulatory reform, judicial activism, legislative activism, and they're imprinting their vision of protection on us. And sadly, their vision for the last best places has one fatal flaw. There's no provision in it for the last best people. And if they don't modify that, the very thing they want to protect is going to pay the price of their protection. And it's not because they're stupid or ill-willed. It's because they have no idea what's really going on in the environment. They have no idea the realities that you wrestle with every single day trying to provide food stuff for them. They're not stupid. They just have very little information. The one thing, the biggest thing that we share right now, by the way, is we only operate with this public body's consent. I call it a social license. They're the people that tell you whether or not you're going to continue to practice animal agriculture in British Columbia. Those are the people you get your social license to operate from. You have to have their consent to continue operating. And sadly, when they're working out whether or not we ought to have consent to operate, and they're fighting for policy that they can implement to save the last best places, there's a problem with the policy they clamor for. Because policy in both of our countries has nothing to do with reality. It has everything to do with the public's perception of reality. And when it comes to their perception, Will Rogers was right. He once said, it ain't what you don't know that's a problem, it's what you know that ain't so that's a problem. And the public body that wants to save our last best places knows precious little about the last best places. And timber, in our discussion down in the States, was the first to run into this collision. We have a beautiful forest that surrounds Libby, Montana, and it's paying the price of their protection. Our forests are being protected to death. This is a healthy forest. It looks very much like the forest around here, the forest around Cranbrook. That's the way people think it's looked forever and ever, amen. What they don't understand is that 15,000 years ago, where I lived didn't have a tree on it because there was a mile of ice. When the ice melted, the Native American population moved in maybe 30,000 years ago, and they started managing. They managed with fire. They burned my valley every 10 to 12 years. So when white man came, he saw a managed garden, essentially. It was an area that had been managed by humans for eons, and there were very few trees. There were 50 or 60 trees to the forested acre, big, thick bark tree without trees that survived the intermittent fire that they were lighting. But they haven't been managing for a while. We now have an overstocked forest. Can you see the red in this? Those red trees are dead trees, and I don't have to tell British Columbia about it because we live in the same forest ecotype. We've got lodgepole pine trees that are the first cover crop that nature puts out after a forest fire. They have heat-sensitive cones that pop open during fires. So for eons, we've had forests that grow for about 100 years, burn for a day, pop open the cones, grow for 100 years, burn for a day, pop open the cones. But since we're not managing, the Native Americans are not managing, we're not removing the fuel, we have an overstocked forest now that is disease-ridden with the northern pine beetle. It is not healthy. It looks like this for miles around my house. And now, instead of going out and managing the forest, removing that fuel and having it look like this, which is good habitat for grizzly bears and moose and elk and all the things we love, instead, and adding fire to the ecosystem so that we continue to remove the fuel, reintroduce a fire ecosystem like the Native Americans had for eons. Instead, we've got so much fuel that the fires are climbing up into the tops of the trees, not staying on the forest floor, but those are fuel ladders that allow the fire to climb up into the tree. And this is what it looks like now when nature is doing the managing. That's a bad day for the elk in the Bitterroot Valley. That's a bad day to try to sell postcards at our local shop. My industry's social license to operate was lost. We now don't have a sawmill in Libby, Montana for the first time in 120 years. Vincent Logging doesn't employ 65 other families. As I speak, we employ 0. We've maintained some of our logging equipment. If you come visit us this summer, you'll find it parked around my house. We've modified it to be firefighting equipment because nature is going to do the managing. And the last time nature managed our patch of terra firma was in 1910. The largest recorded fire in North American history started in Spokane, Washington on August 20th, 1910. A dry summer, very much like the one we're facing right now. 1,000 lightning strikes from one single storm. And then a Pacific front with 75-mile-an-hour winds blew those 1,000 fires into one great big fire that within 36 hours had blown across the panhandle of Idaho, through western Montana, and into British Columbia and Alberta. In 36 hours, 3 million acres went woof without filing an environmental impact statement. Burned the sucker to the ground. It was such a big fire that they called it the summer without a sun in Montreal because their orb, the sun, was orange until the snow flew. It was such a single carbon release event, they think it lowered the global temperature a half a degree. It was a big fire. And the American public was incensed. We're burning our treasure up, so we invented Smokey the Bear. We put lookouts on the mountains, and for 100 years when there's been a little puff of smoke, we've gone out and stomped on it. We were told we were saving the forest. But science for 50 years has told us the other side of that equation. We should have been letting these fires burn a little bit of the forest up a little bit at a time in a traveling mosaic, and now we've got a real problem. And the problem isn't what the public perceives. They perceive us to be almost out of trees. We're not. We have too many trees of the wrong size, of the wrong type, in the wrong place. And now when nature is doing the managing, it's managing it like it's never done before because we have an unnatural fuel load. And the fires that I just showed clips of, they're not burning like they used to. They're not popping open the cones of the lodgepole pine tree. They're incinerating the cones. They're not invigorating the topsoil like good low ground hugging fire can do. They're sterilizing the topsoil right down to bedrock. There are areas in the Bitterroot National Forest because of the fuel load that have burned so hot that the clay soils have been fired into ceramics. You get outside the rich borders of our two countries and reality smacks you in the face. The leading degrader of planet Earth is not profit, it's poverty. When poverty is driving some nations bust, the environment is way in the back behind food, clothing, shelter, the basic human rights. They're not debating viewsheds in Zimbabwe. They're talking about food tomorrow night. And I'm afraid what my country could become is the biggest threat to the global environment through misguided lockup of our own. because we want to consume. It's just production that sucks. We want things, but we don't want to make them ourselves. What we'd like to do is order raw products from developing countries that are long on resources, long on population, and short on cash, order the raw products from them. They'll use methods we quit using 30 years ago to send it to us, but because we don't have to look at production, we'll call it green. There's a thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity. And south of the border, we have crossed that line. When people want things like power, they love power. They want it to be immediate. They want it to be at every switch. They just don't like nuclear plants, coal plants, dams, or fighting the windmills because a bird might hit them. They just want power. They love roads. They like them to be wide and smooth and safe. They just don't like gravel crushing. They don't like asphalt plants. They just want a nice, smooth, clean, safe highway. They love wood. My heavens, when our industry was crashing, commodity use of wood was at the highest level in history. People love wood. It's stumps that suck. How did we get so crazy? If we're going to figure out how to save our rural culture, we've got to figure out how we got here. It's been clear to me for the last 10 years the next marketplace for the conflict industry is anything that has to do with water and anything that has to do with animals. That's you guys. So you're in the crosshairs. What can you do? You can learn to lead. We learned 3 truths the hard way. Truth number 1 that we learned, democracy works, but it's not a spectator sport. Is your member of parliament still here? It works. It's the best system ever designed by humans for bloodless revolution. Look at our country. Swing this way, swing that way, and not one shot fired. Rock and roll, it works. But in order for it to work, we've got to engage in it. And that means we have to make it work for us. That means we have to be registered to vote. We have to be voting. We have to tell our friends who's standing for our interests. We have to support people that support us. How many of you have ever had somebody running for office, their name on your bumper? Seriously, raise your hand. How many of you expect when you send that man to Ottawa that he takes courageous stands for agriculture, animal agriculture? If we don't have the guts to put their name on our bumper, how can we have the gall to ask them to stand out on a political limb with the illumination of the media? If we don't stand with them, they won't stand for us. So we've got to learn how to make the democratic process work. That means finding leaders that understand our issues and then supporting them through the process. Second thing we learned is that when people lead, leaders follow. The leaders in Ottawa or Victoria are no different than the rest of society. 4 generations from the farm. They have no resource linkage. They're trying to figure out animal welfare. And if you can't tell them that there's a choice between forklift in the side and petting a puppy, they're never going to go with forklift in the side. You've got to define to them what animal agriculture, what animal welfare really looks like. You've got to whisper in their ear about how those are false choices. There are choices in between. They're no different than the rest of society. So stake your ground out in a position that you can live with, that you can manage for, and then drive to it. The final truth we learned is the world is run by those who show up. Meetings held every day talking about the future of animal agriculture in Canada, and you can complain about those that show up like religious zealots and throw rocks at you, or you can plop your butt down next to them and compare visions, because they are going to show up. And it doesn't mean you have to show up and take or compromise your business. What it means is showing up in little things like when your leaders of BCcattle say we've got an issue going on in Victoria and you need to be there, it means being there. It means sending an email to your representative. It means going to your conservation board meeting. It means going into a classroom and talking to kids, showing up in the discussion. At stake in this is your social license to operate. I can tell you from my history that if you lose it, you're in trouble and it will take a long time to gain it back. And both the heritage and promise of your ag culture is at stake. This, real quickly, what the public needs in order to maintain your social license, and what John was just talking about, opening your doors. If you want to engage the public in a discussion about the future of sustainable beef in British Columbia, the public needs 3 things. They need the truth, warts, pimples, and all. The folks, the conflict industry that are telling half-truths or sharing misinformation, they can get by with that. You cannot. absolutely truthful, even if it's ugly. And by the way, one of the truths is you're only as good in today's modern age of social media as your worst operator. So the truth is you've got some problems out there, and you know you've got some problems, just like I do in the timber industry. But the public, you need to share it with them, warts, pimples, and all. Then they need to trust. And they don't trust industry. They do not trust capital I industry talking head on the evening news. They trust people over the backyard fence. They trust people at their local Rotary Club. They trust people in their church. They trust people that they've known for 30 or 40 years or would like to know. And lucky for ranching, most of the public would like to know you. That's why they do primetime television shows now on the Discovery Channel. It's because the public still has this romantic notion of who you are, and they want to trust you. They cannot find you in a lie, and you've got to then have transparency because they'd like the truth that you've shared with them to be verifiable. And if they can't attend in person, then they want someone that they trust to attend. What might help? So I'm going to leave you with this. What does help look like? Looks like humanizing, empathizing, and educating, localizing and leading, and participating. What does humanizing mean? It means that it's too easy to vilify industry. The public does not trust industry. That is, it's normal to not trust them, and we've got to quit bitching about it and just get on with our business. It's a reality right now. They do not trust industry. What they do trust are people. They trust their neighbors. And if you're going to talk to the public, if you're going to discuss this with them, you've got to humanize the issue. I heard a lot of science up here. Science is really good, but if you can't package it in a way that emotionally makes sense to them, it's garbage. It doesn't help. And the engagement when we're sharing that with them has got to be shared by humans that they trust. Rural cultures need a trusted ambassador, and that's you. They need that face. And the new backyard fence, by the way, is social media. People are building community online, pushing a button, talking to 10,000 people. It is the new backyard. We've got to learn how to use it. After we humanize it and understand we've got to be the ambassador for this message, we've then got to empathize. Before you can educate somebody, you've got to let them know that you've heard their concerns, real or not. You understand or maybe even share their concerns. And your message has got to be, I am listening, I understand, I respect or share your concerns, and I'm part of the answer to your problems. When you define BC beef as part of the answer to their food safety problems, animal welfare problems, when you define yourself as part of their answer, you've got a sustainable future. But if you can't define yourself and your practices as part of their perceived question or problem, they're going to ultimately write you out. You have to, and believe me, I used to think education was the key. Education is, but first we've got to empathize. In the timber industry, we spent a lot of time playing what I call reverse jeopardy because we did have the truth. So we stood on street corners and we shouted it at people. We played what I call reverse jeopardy because we were answering all the questions the public wasn't asking. We were telling them what we demanded they know instead of asking them, what do you want to know? We were answering our questions and not theirs. So we've got to empathize, listen, be non-judgmental. They're not stupid people. They're very smart, trying to be green. Be their green answer. Then you can educate, and don't play reverse jeopardy. Listen, identify the individual or societal questions or needs, and then communicate those answers to them in English. Be the leader of their solution process. And then lead locally. You can get lost in the trees. The young man that asked the question about, do we need to change education? Yes, we do. But before we start worrying about education nationally or even provincially, look at the education at home like Sherry's going to do. You're going to go home and you're going to talk to a teacher. You need to watch what's going on in your local area because your local folks, your local business peers, your local teachers need to be ambassadors for your truth. And finally, participate. We thought that our associations could do this hard lifting for us. We finally learned that we had to add activism as a line item in our business plan. We finally put it right in front of equipment maintenance, and we don't take it out of social life, family life, church life. It's part of doing business. And activism doesn't sound like fun. I remember the first time I told Dad we had to become activists, the look I got was the one I just got from you. 1 hour a week of doing something to advocate for your culture and your industry. And if we all do that, there's every reason to have hope. How many of you are concerned with the urban people moving out and buying their 20-acre piece of British Columbia? How many of you treat them like the enemy until the week after they're dead? Yeah. What did we used to do in the old? Do you know why they're coming, by the way? Because you live in the last best parts of the world. The same reason they're coming out here to buy their 28-acre piece of Mecca is why you like living here. And can you stop them? No, so they're coming. And we treat them like the enemy until they become the enemy. They gather in these little peer groups of themselves, sharing the misinformation amongst each other in an echo chamber, and they become the enemy. In the old days, when new people came to town, what'd we do? It was new blood, new money. Somebody who signs a cousin to marry our daughter. We met him with a pie. Hey, thanks for coming. I encourage you guys in rural BC cattlemen to meet the new people and greet them. Tell them, I know why you came. It's the same reason we love it here. And this is what made it the way it is. Warts, pimples, and all. Turn them into friends before they become enemies. Work on a welcome wagon. One of the ways to do that is to celebrate Earth Day. If you're going to lead the green discussion, take that week over. Look what you've got, the progress you've made during every year during Earth Week. And I've pounded on the forest industry to do this. I asked Louisiana Pacific about 15 years ago, do you guys spend any money on Earth Day? They said, yeah, a lot. I said, on what? They said, increased security. You know, maybe we ought to, during that week, engage the public with our concerns, being empathetic to their perceived problems, and once a week celebrating how we're answering their questions. We need a new environmental vision built on hope instead of fear, science instead of emotion, education instead of litigation, resolution instead of conflict, and employing rather than destroying human resources. And the new movements can be led by rural people because we live too close to the ground to pretend. What I ask you to do is go home after this meeting and focus on something that you can do. Nobody's going to do it for you. It needs to be part of doing business, a line item in your business plan for activism. 1 hour a week, doing something.